Earl, up top, rising, layup, good. It's a triple-double for Bella Earl.
Those matched up with a speedy guard. Great screen, spin move, layup, he missed it. Williamson fights for the board. His putback is good.
We've reached the halfway point of the women's basketball season, and we're going to start to take a look back at first halves and look at second halves coming up. We're starting with Southern Utah, and the play-by-play voice of the T-Birds, Spencer McLaughlin, joining us on Tuesday morning. Spencer, thanks for joining us.
Anytime, Daryl. Always down to talk WAC hoops.
All right. So taking a look at the T-Birds, early season profile, 4-17 overall, 2-6 in WAC play. It's been a tough start for the T-Birds, much to, I think, a lot of people's surprise.
Yeah, it certainly has been tough. There's no other way to kind of square that, just because it's been a season where they've struggled really at both ends of the floor. I mean, you look at what they've done offensively this year. Their 2 conference wins have come when they've hit 60 points, and when they haven't hit 60 points in conference play, they haven't won. And, the California Baptist win on the road, which is who they play on Thursday, was, I mean, a really, really important win for this team. But then they come back home last week and lose 2 straight on their home floor. So it's definitely been a challenging year, one where, everyone's resilience is going to be tested. Players, coaches, fans, supporters, like whoever. It's really just been a season that I certainly would put myself in that camp of, the expectations I had were certainly higher than this, because I know that's the expectation they had internally was higher than what they've put together so far. But I think you have seen improvement in conference play. With that win at Cal Bap was they were down 10 with 2.5, 3 minutes to go. They stormed back to win by 1 on a late shot by De La Bolina, one of their senior guards. And, that felt like kind of a sigh of relief, like, oh, man, it was exciting, but it was also, okay, we can do this. Like the potential is still there. And I think that's what has certainly been, disappointing for a lot of people who looked at them and said, boy, they could be, middle upper half of the conference this year, is they have a lot of veteran talent. They have a lot of proven experience that have not just been productive individually, but have been a part of winning teams in the past, either here or elsewhere. And those players are still there. It's a bit of a contrast from the men's side, who are also struggling right now on account of the fact that they're just not healthy. And the potential that existed on paper coming into the season for Coach Mason's team is still in there. And I know that they can find it, but they have to find it. And they just haven't gotten there yet, particularly at the offensive end of the floor. And, it just hasn't quite gelled the way that I think they're capable of. But it's early February, Daryl. So the time to try and right the ship is absolutely there. But it's also never as long as you think.
Yeah, I mean, 4 weeks and 8 games is going to go by in the snap of a finger. Luckily, unlike last year, where 3 teams missed WAC Vegas, all 9 teams get in. It's just a matter of whether you're going to start in St. George or go bypass St. George and go straight to the Orleans Arena. And right now, the T-Birds have a 1-game lead precarious 1-game lead. Probably the CBU win will over Utah Tech in that race for the 8th spot. I think it's reasonable to say Seattle has locked themselves into playing in St. George on March 11th.
Yeah, I mean, it seems that way, but I've seen crazier turnarounds happen before. I mean, a couple of years ago on the men's side, New Mexico State was dealing with all sorts of off the field issues, and it had clearly carried over into the locker room, and they were having problems on the court. And all of a sudden they won a couple of games late, and had this same sort of structure been in place, you would have, felt differently about them. Kind of, I think it was the end of February when they made a little spurt and beat a couple of good teams. You would have felt differently about them then than you did a few weeks prior. So we'll see how teams are able to play going into WAC Vegas, but I do think that's the primary goal for Southern Utah right now is make sure you make it to Vegas. And yeah, it doesn't sound like a lot from an outside standpoint if you haven't followed the WAC a ton this year to say, can you make it into the top 7 out of 9 teams in the league to automatically qualify for the conference tournament? And it's certainly not where I think this team is capable of getting to, but it's the situation that they're in right now. And I'm as you can see with the poster behind me, I'm a big golfer, and if I'm struggling in the middle of a round, which happens a lot because golf is really hard, one thing that I try to do is set a small goal, whether that's make 2 pars in a row or find one birdie. Just do something to settle it down, weather the storm, achieve that goal, then make the next one. Don't shoot for, hey, we need to figure out how we can, play with GCU on a more consistent basis. They had a great first half against them in Cedar City, and then it got away from them in the second because GCU is, of course, a really, really talented team. But I think setting those small goals can do a lot for the confidence of the team and just kind of the fluidity that they play with when they come out on the floor because offensively they just haven't settled in all year. Working in a couple of newcomers, no one really has settled in. Belina's scoring and Johnston's scoring have taken steps back. Gandy's well below her season averages. Like it's just been, Ava Urich's not scoring as much as she was last year, and part of that is that they have more depth, so they're not as reliant on a couple of players to score the basketball. But the percentages that I think a lot of players are shooting are below where they'd expect to be or where they've shown they're capable of getting to in their careers. So I think it really is a cliche but true. Like one game at a time is how you have to look at it. California Baptist up on Thursday. Get a win there. Have a season sweep against the reigning champs. I know they're not the exact same roster as they were a year ago, but they've got 6 returners from that team, so it's not as if they're completely void of talent. They're not the same team they were last season when they went to the NCAA tournament, but I think that's just where it has to start for Southern Utah is find a small goal to achieve. They haven't played either game against Utah Tech. So that rivalry game, that's something that you look at and can set as a small goal. Like, hey, make sure you get at least one of those wins or win both of those games. And I think if they win at least one, they'll be in a good position to avoid that play-in game. And if they win both of them, I think they'll be in a great position.
Yeah, looking at that CBU game on Thursday, obviously they won the first one in a thrilling 10-point comeback. And you're right, this isn't the same Lancer roster that they had to play against last year. But Chloe Lemon's still there playing really well. Grace Schmidt, after missing a couple games, is back and back to form. That's going to be a tough challenge for the T-Birds in the AFAC to pull that one off. And I think it's one of those games where you look at, I think 65 as the match. If it gets above 65, I think Southern Utah is going to have a hard time keeping up. And I think you're right. You have to take advantage of the in-state games, the 2 against Utah Tech, the 2 against UVU, a couple of those, and you're probably off of the hook in terms of starting in St. George.
Yeah, I think if you get a split in those matchups, both of them, you're doing well. And if you're 3-1, I think that would all but lock it up because you'd have, a head-to-head sweep with one of them, and you would have picked up 3 wins in that scenario. And they're, of course, sitting at 2. But, to your 65 number, I think you're absolutely right that if Southern Utah gets there, I wouldn't say that, their defense has always been outstanding this season, but I don't think it's been the reason they've struggled to win games. I mentioned it earlier. They just have, when they have hit 60 points in a conference game this year, they are 2-0. When they don't, they are 0-6. That's been the magic number. You get to 65, I think their defense is good enough because they've got a lot of length. There are a lot of length everywhere you look. Belina and Gandy are both athletic guards that get plenty of steals. Ashley Banks and Jaden Brown are probably the best 1-2 shot blocker tandem, starter and off the bench in the country. And Brown has, been in and out of the starting lineup this year. But those two with Lexi Bowl as one of the most productive rebounders in the last week in probably all of women's college basketball, like that I think is enough. You know, Courtney Doman comes off the bench, she can defend. Sam Johnston is 6 feet tall with really long arms. The pieces are there at that end of the floor to at least be solid. They haven't been a dominant unit or, you know, anything like that, but they have, in my view, been good enough there. The offense has just been lacking. And I think that also hurts their defensive output because teams will beat them down the floor in transition off the missed shots. Well, the more missed shots you put up, the more opportunities you give your opponents to get out and run. And then that doesn't give you the opportunity to run in return, which is something I think they are really capable of. So I think that that offense has to find its footing. You know, shooters who have been good shooters their whole careers have to start hitting shots. That's really as simple as it. I don't think they're looking for, you know, a young kid to step up and play a role that she's not ready for. It's just players who you know can shoot and score have to shoot and score. And if that happens, then I think this is, you know, a team that's better than what their record is sitting at right now.
Yeah, I mean, you've seen the thing of it is with the T-Birds, I don't think they've put together a full 40 minutes yet on both ends.
No,
You've seen like the Cal Poly second half. Okay, that was good 20 minutes right before the break. They had UT Arlington on the ropes for what? 35 minutes of that game. And then just the high-low combination there with Brittingham and Love just took over and late in that game.
Yeah, fouls became a storyline in that
Yeah.
game, shall we say. You had Lexi Bull, Jaden Brown, and Ashley Banks all hit 4 fouls before the 6 minute mark of the fourth quarter. And one or two of them had 4 by the third. And when you're going up against maybe the best post tandem in the league with Brittingham and Love, that's just not a recipe for success. You know, Lexi Bull was called for what I thought was an incorrect call on a supposed illegal screen. I don't know what was illegal about it exactly. It not only took a 3-pointer off the board that Sam Johnston knocked down from the corner, but it also made Lexi Bull play cautious. And if you watch her play, there's nothing cautious about the way that she plays basketball because that's just not how she's wired. She's the ultimate embrace my role. I need to go get a rebound, set a screen. That's what I do. And she loves that. But when you give her a 4th foul late in the third quarter, and she might not have been out there if Banks and Brown weren't both already in foul trouble, because all of a sudden then you'd be turned into a true freshman to start against a veteran post tandem, and that's not that viable of an option. Lexi Bull then at the other end essentially had to concede baskets to Coy Love.
Yeah.
She went down there and knew I cannot foul. I cannot foul. And she was incredibly cautious. And that was probably a 6 to 8 point swing easily in what ended up being a game that Southern Utah had the ball down 2 with 11 seconds to go and unfortunately turned it over down on the baseline. But quite frankly, I think that's the best 4-quarter game they've put together this season. I don't think it's the best they can play. I think it's the best they have played because that's a really good and really veteran UT Arlington team. And Southern Utah led more of that game than they trailed. They got off to a good start, which has been a problem for them. And then they just kept UT Arlington at bay. Then the foul trouble arose. The Lady Mavs made a run, but Southern Utah was still right back in it and just couldn't quite execute like they needed to down the stretch in a couple spots. But I think if a couple of foul calls go Southern Utah's way, that's a very, very different basketball game.
Yeah. And that finishes the series with the Lady Mavs. Southern Utah's finished with GCU too in this funky schedule where you're playing a lot of people twice in 15, whatever it is, days. Taking a look at the larger WAC picture, obviously GCU's at the top of the pyramid at 19-2, undefeated in the WAC. They've had to
I think they
get
hit
a couple
20.
of it.
I think they hit 20 and 2. Yeah, 18 straight wins.
Yeah. They've had to escape a couple of narrow ones, though. I mean, Saturday at Utah Valley, Dan Nielsen's much improved bunch gave them a big-time scare for 3.5 quarters. And I, I think right now the story is GCU obviously, but what are some of the surprising stories that you've seen from the first half? Is it, the defending champs already on 3 losses? Is it ACU 1 game ahead of Utah Tech for that 8th spot? What surprised you so far in the first half of the season?
I think there was always going to be some regression from California Baptist. I don't know that I saw them falling down this hard from last season because, like we were mentioning, they've got some really talented players who were on last year's team, and you'd think that core would be enough to at least have them closer to 500 on the season. They played a pretty tough non-conference schedule, but I didn't see them being in this spot right now where they're kind of, in a position where they're teetering between elevating to the top half of the league or falling down towards the bottom half. And I don't think they're, in any danger of having to go towards the play-in game in the 8-9 spot. But I do think that this game they're coming into in Cedar City on Thursday is going to be really telling for them with regards to whether they, can ascend back up to a 2 or 3 seed or whether they're going to go in as a 6 or 7 seed, going into WAC Vegas. But that's one thing that has stood out. But I was really impressed with Tarleton the other day. They came in to the AFEC and beat Southern Utah pretty handily, and they've got great guard play, Daryl. Great guard play. Mayana Little and Jacoria Long. That is a dynamic backcourt that in this conference, I think can give anybody fits. And what was so impressive, Bill Brock has done a great job in the last couple of years. Of course, got them their first Division 1 conference tournament win a season ago. And I think they have done a great job of embracing what he tells them because Southern Utah sat in a zone. Tarleton's not a big 3-point shooting team. Really, outside of GCU, Daryl, I'm sure you've seen this as well. There are not a lot of great 3-point shooting teams in this conference. There really aren't. It's kind of GCU and Cal Bat
Has had
can hit some
moments.
threes. Yeah, has had moment, but like overall, I'm pretty sure more than half of the league is under 30% from 3-point range as a team this season. That's just something I've noticed as conference play has gone along. But Southern Utah, read that scattering report with Tarleton. They don't shoot a ton of threes. They don't hit a super high percentage. And so they worked in some 2-3 zone, which they've thrown in as a defensive wrinkle a couple times this year. But Tarleton was so patient. Their zone offense was so smart because Southern Utah was daring players to shoot threes and they would not take the quick shot. It's easy to walk in and say, "Oh, look, I'm open for three." Well, that's kind of the shot they want you to take because the numbers telling them you're not going to hit that at a super high clip. They passed up so many open threes to either find a three that's more open or in a better rhythm later, or at least makes the defense work a little bit and shift around as you move it side to side, or they would just attack. They would just attack, but they never felt like they were out of their rhythm or not in control of what they wanted to do. So whether Southern Utah was playing man to man or zone defense, it did not matter. And I thought that was a really impressive coaching performance by Bill Brock and his staff. And it's not a super big team. They've got a couple solid bigs. Faith Acker is a good player, and they bring Begovic off the bench as well. But that's a team to me that is scary because of its guards. And I think that Little and Long together, that's as
Ariana
athletic and
Roseborough, who is arguably would
yeah.
be on the
Yeah,
all
and
newcomer
I
team.
didn't even mention Rossborough, who was fantastic in the game and is really, really good inside when she drives downhill. So those three guards, give me a tandem that's way better than them in the whack.
Not, I don't know that you'll find, maybe Chloe Lemon and Nook Bosch Duran if they put it together. Peyton Hall, Bella Earl when they're healthy. But no, those are,
Durazo Frescas in San Antonio at
yeah,
GCU, yeah,
GCU.
obviously. But again, Tarleton's got three.
Yeah,
Most of
you're not
those
going to find
teams
a guard trio that's at that level.
where any given night, one of those guards can give you 20 points and two of them can give you 15 plus.
Yeah,
That's a rarity to me. And I think that that makes them a dangerous team. Teams that do well in conference tournaments and March Madness, you look up and down, any conference, any level, men's or women's side, they've always got good guard play. Always have good guard play because they're dictating so much about what you're able to do offensively. They can create for others. And I like Tarleton's guards a lot.
Yeah, and that's kind of what they were lacking last year was, a solid guard. I mean, you know, Little was back from last year, Long was back from last year, but I think they lacked that third scorer to kind of make them an offensive threat. I mean, they're up to 71 points per game now. I was just looking at the conference report, third in conference offense. And last year they were one of the top scoring defenses, and they're that way again. So, I mean, just look at the fact that they held GCU to 0 for 14 from three-point land at Wisdom Gym, albeit Durazo Frescas did not play in that game. But still,
I mean, that's obviously a sizable help, but holding everyone else to over 14, that's a testament to, I think, what they've been able to execute at that end of the floor, in addition to what I like on offense. And third best scoring offense in the conference, Daryl, they're not doing it with threes. They're not chucking them up. They are going to nickel and dime you to death, and they are more than comfortable to just wait for their opening. 10 gets on the shot clock. They're not panicked. They're not in a hurry. They're not forcing the issue. They're making the right reads, making good passes, finding open players, making hard cuts, and they finish at the rim.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Tarleton has definitely been a surprise. They're in third place at 5-3. The other surprise for me has been Utah Valley, picked to finish 8th by the coaches, also in that 5-3 conversation. On pace for their most wins in 3 or 4 years. And arguably, if it wasn't for GCU, Dan Nielsen would probably be the coach of the year right now.
Yeah, it's pretty. It's hard to overlook, what is currently an 18-game winning streak. Regardless of, how good they've been, it feels strange, but Molly Miller hasn't taken that program to the NCAA tournament yet. She can certainly do that this year, but I think I haven't seen UVU in person yet, so I don't have as much of an in-person scouting report there. But something I've noticed with them over the last couple seasons, always tend to be scrappy. Never gonna make it, at least not super often. They're not gonna make it super easy on you. And I think there is an element to the WAC, as in a lot of leagues. Anybody feels like they could beat anybody. Maybe not everybody could beat GCU right now, but that doesn't mean that GCU is totally invulnerable, because as you mentioned, they've played some tight ones. Every undefeated team in any sport has had close games. It always happens. And once you get into March, that pressure ratchets up. Players get a little bit tighter, thinking about what they're supposed to do, what should be, and all that. And anything can happen there. And I think what every coaching staff is trying to accomplish right now is, hey, what does our best version of basketball look like? And then how do we sustain that so we know how to bring it to the Orleans Arena in March?
All right. Let's get to some second half predictions. Does GCU finish the regular season undefeated? They hit the meat and potatoes of the schedule here for the next couple of weeks. CBU twice in 14 days. UT Arlington twice in, I believe it's 17 or 18 days, all in the month of February. Do they finish that stretch undefeated and the regular season undefeated?
It's really tough. I mean, a unit as talented as CBU was last year, they didn't go undefeated in conference play. So making a prediction for a team to go unbeaten in league play, no matter which league it is, that's a challenging ordeal. Gonzaga doesn't go undefeated in league play in men's basketball every season. So, I suspect GCU at some point has one of those games where, maybe it's an off shooting night for Durazo Frescas, or the other team is red hot from three and hits, 12 to 15 of them to keep up with the way they can score the basketball. There are a lot of different factors that go into being unbeaten, and I think that the depth of the league at the top is really solid. And California Baptist, not quite what they were a season ago, but still have got veteran players that know what it takes to win in this league. And UT Arlington as well, that is just a great post tandem. I think their guard play is a little underrated, but you look at Brittingham and Love and say, boy, I don't think you've got a better post tandem in the entire conference than those two. And if you don't have the ability to slow them down, they're not going to outthink the room. And Sharika Wright's not going to say, well, let's make sure we get everybody involved. No, she'll just force feed them in the best possible way. She'll say, hey, these players combined for 25 points in the first half, and we've got 31. I want them to combine for 30 in the second. That's what they did against Southern Utah. It was, hey, this works, go. Just keep going back to it, keep going back to it. And if you struggle to slow them down, which they're tough to deal with because they're incredibly skilled, incredibly crafty, they use their size really well. Love is a good, athlete as well who can beat you off the dribble a bit. That can be tough. So, I just say for generalized purposes, it's hard to go undefeated in the league.
All right. All right. Other second half question. If Southern Utah is going to play their way off of the eight, not that 7-8-9 line, who is going to show the most improvement on that T-Birds roster over the next month to get them there?
Ooh, boy. Um, can I only pick one player?
If it's a couple, it's a couple.
Yeah, I think it's a pair. I think Sam Johnston, who's starting to look more like herself, and Sydney Gandy, who had a great game against California Baptist in that win in Riverside. I think those two have to get going because those are the best 3-point shooters Southern Utah has. By percentage, De La Bolina is actually the best, but she's not a volume 3-point shooter. She wants to get downhill and use her athleticism, and she's a good finisher inside. Bolina's been playing great over the last few games. Her scoring has ticked up closer to where, I thought it might be coming into her fifth and final season of college basketball. But you've still got two incredibly capable shooters in Johnston and Gandy that are under 30% from outside. They don't have to go on the tear of all tears each and both be 40% sharpshooters. But if they can just be in the low 30s from outside over the next few weeks, you're talking about anywhere on a given night, I would say just getting to that point. And Sam Johnston's a career 33 or I think 32.8% 3-point shooter. She just shoots that average. If Gandy gets around 30%, I think Southern Utah would have another 9 to 12 points per game on average because they're volume shooters. They are going to put up the shots when they're there because they're good shooters historically. I mean, Gandy, the first memory I think or the only memory probably that Thunderbird fans have of her before she came to Southern Utah was in the Big Sky tournament a couple of years ago. Thunderbirds were, I think, the 3 seed, and they got upset in the first round by Idaho, led by 22 points, scored by one Sydney Gandy, who hit 5 triples in that game. Now, that she doesn't have to be that player or have that sort of output game in and game out for the Southern Utah offense to take a step forward, but just a couple of threes here and there, it feels so hard for them to make shots from distance, and those two are going to continue getting looks because that's what they do on the basketball court. And if they start hitting their shots, I think there's enough inside scoring for Southern Utah to average over that 60-point threshold per game and closer to 65 because Bolina can get downhill and Jaden Brown and Ashley Banks can give you a couple buckets in the paint. And Ava Urick can score at all 3 levels and does so with tremendous efficiency. They can score inside, but they just haven't had that outside shooting. And I think those two have to be able to hit their threes at a higher clip.
All right. When all is said and done, when we get to March 8th and the curtain closes on the regular season, who do you think is the player of the year in the WAC?
Ooh. Player of the year in the WAC. I'll throw a couple names at you. have never been a huge, you can see the college football stuff behind me. I've never been a huge Heisman selection guy before the year. Like I know who's going to be in the mix, but so many things have to go in your favor for that to build to that point and you to get an award like that. I mean, Durazo Frescas at GCU is just lights out as a shooter. Brittingham at UT Arlington is one of the most unique players in all of women's college basketball with, how much of a point forward she is. Like she is the Nikola Jokic of the WAC. Everything runs through her. She passes incredibly well. She will score. She doesn't shoot the three, but doesn't need to in that UT Arlington offense. So I think she would be in the mix as well. I wouldn't be totally shocked if, you had someone kind of come out of the blue that you don't think of per se, but these tend to be season long awards that, have started cementing themselves in people's minds earlier in conference play. But with still a month and a half left of the season and what this push is going to look like, anybody could go on a tear and suddenly just tear it up. But those would be the two players I think that have stood out the most to me, and their teams are having a lot of success as well.
All right. We've got a little bit less than 10 minutes left on this Zoom, so let's talk a little bit of realignment. Obviously, the pick landscape keeps shifting. All sorts of different. Sacramento State talk of going FBS independent. Do you think a lot of what will happen to the future of the WAC is going to depend on what happens to the revamped whatever they're called Pac, whatever they're calling themselves?
The Pac-12,
Yeah.
RIP, but also welcome back, sort of, kind of, maybe. No, I don't think those things are directly tied just because, in the WAC, you don't have FBS football programs that get as impacted. There are trickle-down effects, like the Mountain West adding NIU as a football member and bringing in UTEP to the conference. Those moves, create an opening in Conference USA. And then you think about, well, could a school from the WAC be a candidate to go to Conference USA? Yeah, no reason that that couldn't be the case. The league has, of course, looked there before with Sam Houston and New Mexico State just a couple of years ago. And I think they're overall enjoying those moves. New Mexico State has, made a conference championship game, and Sam Houston has turned their football program around. And it can do a lot when you make that sort of jump. So it's very appealing. And when I say it can do a lot, it energizes your fan base, and I think the donors you have at a school when you are jumping up to a bigger level. And yeah, it costs a lot of money. It can be logistically challenging, but it can also be incredibly beneficial for what you're trying to accomplish as an athletic department. So I think that's kind of the range that I look at with the WAC. But the immediate pressing issue here, Daryl, is they've got to find at least one school to get to 8. You have to have 8 full-time members in your conference. Now, there's a 2-year grace period granted by the NCAA if you fall below that number, which the WAC will starting next season. So they don't have to add a school for next year or even technically the year after. But if they don't inform the schools what plan that's going to be and how it can stabilize the conference, I think you could see or hear a lot of rumblings about more schools wanting to jump ship or looking for a place where, they're on stable ground. So I don't have a crystal ball to say what is going to happen, but if we're just being honest about it, it's a really difficult time for the WAC. They are not in a good position. They don't have any stability. You had 2 schools leave last year, 2 more leaving this year. There's no way you can spin that into we feel great about, the future of the conference. You're just trying to make sure you're going to continue having a conference. Like that's where they're at. They're in full-fledged survival mode, and a move will have to be made at some point. It doesn't have to be next week or next month, but within the next year, I think you have to let schools know, or they will ask around to see what kind of offers they can field.
Yeah, and the tough part is right now we have an interim commissioner right now in Rebecca Ray with the departure of Brian Thornton for the Big 12. So, I mean, that stability even at the top in the office isn't there. So from a school's perspective, when you're an outside school looking at the WAC, it's like interim commissioner down to the bare minimum 7 members at the end of the academic year. What's this look like in 3 or 4 years? Are we going to be looking for another place to play?
Yeah, I would venture a little bit more than a guess to say those conversations have already started taking place. It doesn't mean that, the WAC's going to blow up tomorrow and everyone's about to announce their intentions to leave. But if within the next year, 1 or 2 more schools announce their intention to leave, I wouldn't be surprised at that. But again, I'm not reporting anything and saying that it's imminent. I'm just reading the landscape and saying, I don't know how this doesn't happen, barring a move from the WAC. They look at Commissioner Ray and say, hey, this is someone who we believe in, who has the ability to stabilize the conference. I don't know. I've met her. She seems really nice and incredibly capable, but there are a lot of factors that go into that particular role. So I think that it's a really difficult place to be. You're trying to thread the needle in a lot of different ways. And I don't know if it can be threaded all the way through. I'd wish for it to do that, or else we don't get to do this podcast anymore one day. But such is the way of the world. Realignment never dies.
Yep. And it was, how did I put it to Jared Olson last year? Realignment gives me flashbacks back to high school algebra. Because it was the one class I barely passed.
And
it
just
was
the one? Just the one?
I was a solid student, but Algebra 2 gave me fits, and I liken realignment to that because it's like A squared plus B squared equals C squared. It's like your A squared is the base of the conference right now, but your B squared is, what's coming in.
Who knows? Who knows?
All right. Spencer McLaughlin, the Southern Utah voice of the T-Birds. Thanks for joining us on this Tuesday. Tune in to ESPN Plus on Thursday night. He has the call of the Southern Utah California Baptist women's game, the rematch of that thrilling finish in Riverside. What is that, 6 p.m. Mountain?
I should probably look into that, huh? It's either 6 or 6:30. I think it's 6:30.
6 or 6:30 on ESPN Plus for the
one of those things.
That Southern Utah California Baptist University rematch. Spencer, thanks for taking the time.
You're very welcome, Daryl. Anytime, my man.
Thanks for listening to the Straight Outta WAC podcast. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcasting platforms. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Remember to follow WAC Hoops Nation on all your favorite social media platforms.